My brother texted, "Wire $5,000 now. Dad promised you'd clear my gambling debt tonight," while I was in the hospital holding my newborn daughter after 20 hours of labor. I called my father immediately and he confirmed, "Just this once, you have that promotion money saved and Jake needs it more than you do." I replied with a photo of my baby's hospital bracelet and wrote, "Your granddaughter was born today, but clearly you only have one child." The 3 dots appeared on my screen showing my father was typing. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally. Don't be dramatic. Family helps family. Your brother is in real trouble this time. Real trouble. Those words had been the soundtrack of my entire childhood. Jake was in real trouble when he crashed Dad's car at 16. Real trouble when he dropped out of college after 1 semester despite full scholarship. Real trouble when he lost his first 3 jobs for showing up drunk. And now, at 31, real trouble meant owing money to people who apparently couldn't wait 1 more day while his sister recovered from bringing life into the world. My husband David stood at the hospital room window, our daughter asleep in his arms, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. He'd heard the entire conversation on speakerphone. The nurse who'd been checking my vitals had frozen mid-motion, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry," I told her quietly. "Family drama." She recovered her professional composure quickly, but I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She'd probably seen this dynamic before. Families who couldn't put aside their dysfunction even for something as sacred as a birth. David finally turned from the window. "Tell me you're not actually considering this." "I'm not." My voice came out flat. Dead. 20 hours of labor followed by this. I looked down at my phone where the family group chat was now exploding with messages. Jake had apparently decided to take his case public. Jake, can't believe my own sister would let me get hurt over $5K when she just got that huge promotion. Jake, all I'm asking for is a loan I'll pay back. Jake, Dad's right. Family is supposed to help each other. Dad, Rebecca, your mother would be so disappointed in you right now. That last message hit like a physical blow. Mom had died 2 years ago from breast cancer. In her final weeks, she'd made me promise to take care of Dad and Jake. I'd held her hand and sworn I would. But she'd been the buffer, the one who could tell Jake no, who could make Dad see reason. Without her, the dysfunction she'd managed to contain had metastasized into something toxic. I started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again. Deleted again. What could I possibly say that would make them understand? This wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that my brother thought it was acceptable to demand it while I was literally in a hospital bed. It was about my father believing Jake's gambling debt was more important than meeting his first grandchild. My phone rang. Dad. I declined the call. It rang again immediately. Declined again. Then a text from Jake. Fine, guess I know where I stand. Don't come crying to me when you need help someday. The audacity of it struck me almost funny. When had I ever needed help from Jake? When had he ever offered? I'd been financially independent since college. I'd put myself through graduate school while working full-time. I'd bought my own home, built my own career, created my own life. Meanwhile, Jake had needed temporary help, roughly every 3 months for the past decade. David sat beside my bed, still holding Lily with the fierce protectiveness of a new father. You know what I think? I think we should block both of them. Right now. They don't get to meet her. They don't get to be in her life at all. Part of me agreed. But another part, the part that still grieved for my mother, the part that remembered Dad pushing me on swings and teaching me to ride a bike, that part hesitated. Was I really ready to cut off my only remaining family? My phone vibrated with another text, this time from a number I didn't recognize. You have 24 hours. Jake knows where you live. My hands went cold. I showed David the message. His face went from anger to something harder, more dangerous. That's a threat, he said quietly. That's an actual threat. He stood carefully, laying Lily in her bassinet, and pulled out his own phone. I'm calling the police. Wait. I caught his arm. Let me think. Think about what? Your brother just threatened us, while you're in a hospital bed with our newborn daughter. His voice rose, causing Lily to stir. He forced himself to speak more quietly. There's nothing to think about, Rebecca. This crosses every line. He was right. Of course he was right. But my father's words echoed in my head. Your mother would be so disappointed. Would she? Or would she have been disappointed in them for putting me in this position? I looked at my daughter, her tiny, perfect face, her miniature fingers curled into fists. In 20 years, if she had a sibling who constantly manipulated her, who threatened her during vulnerable moments, who saw her only as a resource to exploit? What would I want her to do? The answer was clear. I picked up my phone and opened a new text to my father. You're right that Mom would be disappointed, but not in me. I've spent my entire life watching you enable Jake's destruction while treating my success as a bank account for his failures. I just gave birth to your granddaughter, and instead of congratulations, you demanded money for your son's gambling debts. So here's what's going to happen. You won't meet Lily, you won't get photos, you won't be part of her life. Neither will Jake. You've made your choice about who your real child is, and I'm making mine about who gets to be in my daughter's life. People who actually love her. People who would never use her mother's vulnerability as leverage. Don't contact me again. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I did the same in the group chat, but with an addition. And Jake? That threat you just sent? I've already forwarded it to the police. You'll be hearing from them soon. David was already on the phone with hospital security, explaining the situation. Within minutes, a security officer appeared at our door to take our statement and add Jake's name to a restricted list. As the officer left, promising patrol would drive by our house extra times for the next few days, my phone started ringing. Dad, Jake, Dad again. I turned off my phone completely and handed it to David. Put it somewhere I can't reach it, I said, at least for tonight. He took it, but he was looking at me with something like awe. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen you do. I didn't feel badass. I felt hollowed out. Grief and rage and relief mixing into something I couldn't quite name. I'd just cut off my father and brother, on the day my daughter was born. This should have been the happiest day of my life, and they'd made it something else entirely. But as I looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully despite the drama swirling around her, I felt something else too. Determination. She would never know a family dynamic where love was conditional, where being successful meant being exploited, where vulnerable moments were opportunities for manipulation. The nurse returned to check on us, tactfully not mentioning the earlier scene. As she updated my chart, she said quietly, "For what it's worth, I've worked in maternity for 15 years. You did the right thing." I nodded, not trusting my voice. After she left, David climbed carefully into the hospital bed beside me, an arm around my shoulders. "You know this isn't over, right? They're going to try everything to make you feel guilty." I know. I leaned against him, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with labor. But I'm done. I'm finally done. What I didn't know yet was just how not done they were, and how much worse things would get before I got my revenge. 3 days after bringing Lily home, I walked into my kitchen to find my father sitting at my table. He had used the emergency key I'd given him years ago, back when I still believed family meant safety. David had already left for work, an unavoidable meeting he'd tried to reschedule. I was alone with a 3-day-old baby and an intruder who happened to be my father. "You need to change your locks," were his first words, not an apology, not congratulations on his granddaughter. A criticism dressed as advice. "You need to leave my house." I kept my voice level, one hand on my phone in my pocket. "Now, we need to talk about your behavior at the hospital." He stood, and I saw he'd made himself coffee from my machine. The casual entitlement of it made my jaw clench. "You embarrassed the entire family with that dramatic text message." I embarrassed the family? The laugh that came out of me was sharp enough to cut. "Dad, Jake threatened me while I was in a hospital bed holding my newborn. You demanded $5,000 instead of asking how your grandchild was. But I'm the embarrassment?" Jake was desperate. Those people he owes money to are dangerous. Then maybe he shouldn't have gambled money he didn't have to dangerous people. I moved to the kitchen doorway, blocking his path to the rest of the house where Lily slept. How much does he actually owe? My father's eyes slid away from mine. "That's not the point." "How much, Dad?" $23,000. He said it quietly, like lowering his volume would make the number less obscene. "But he has a plan to pay it back." "No, he doesn't." I felt something cold settle in my chest. He's never had a plan. He's 31 years old and you're still cleaning up his messes while he makes more. When does it end? When family stops abandoning each other over money. His voice rose, righteous anger coloring every word. "Your mother and I raised you better than this." Mom would have told him no. The words came out before I could stop them. She did tell him no. Multiple times. I was there. I heard her. And every time you overruled her and gave him money anyway. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, but it vanished quickly. "Your mother was too hard on Jake. He's sensitive. He's had a harder time finding his way than you did. He's had the exact same opportunities I had. Better ones, actually, since you paid for his entire college before he dropped out." I pulled out my phone. "You have 60 seconds to leave before I call the police for trespassing." "You wouldn't. Try me." I started dialing. "I've already filed one police report this week about Jake's threats." Want me to make it too about you breaking into my house? He stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the daughter who would have swallowed her hurt and written the check had died somewhere between labor and that first text message. This isn't over, Rebecca. He headed for the door but turned back. Jake lost his job yesterday. The police questioned him at work about the threat charge you filed. His boss fired him on the spot. He has no income now, no way to pay back what he owes. If something happens to him, that's on you. The door slammed before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, shaking, as Lily began to cry from the nursery. I forced my breathing to steady before going to her, forced my hands to stop trembling as I picked her up. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hope you can live with yourself. Then another. Blood money is all you had to give and you couldn't even do that. Then another. Dad had to take out a loan against his house because of you. I blocked each number, but they kept coming. Different numbers, same messages. Jake had clearly found friends willing to let him use their phones. By that evening, David found me sitting in the nursery, Lily asleep in my arms, my phone on the floor across the room where I'd thrown it. What happened? He knelt beside the rocking chair, his hand on my knee. I told him everything. The break-in, the guilt trip, the barrage of messages, the news about Jake's job and Dad's loan. Maybe I should have just given them the money. Stop. David's voice was sharp enough to make me look at him. This is what they want. They want you to feel so guilty that you cave. But let's be clear about something. Jake lost his job because he sent you a threatening text message, not because you reported it. Your dad took out a loan because he chose to enable Jake's gambling, not because you refused to. None of this is your fault. Then why does it feel like it is? Because they've spent your entire life training you to feel responsible for Jake's choices. He stood, taking Lily from my arms and placing her gently in her crib. Come with me. He led me to his office, a small room at the back of the house that served as his workspace. He opened his laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet I'd never seen before. I started tracking this after your mom's funeral, he said quietly. Every time your dad or Jake asked you for money, every loan that was never repaid, every emergency that somehow became your problem. I stared at the numbers. 3 years of data. Dates. Amounts. Reasons given. The total at the bottom made my stomach turn. $47,000. That's not possible, but even as I said it, I knew it was. The money had gone out in smaller amounts. 1,000 here, 1,500 there, each one accompanied by promises of repayment that never materialized. It gets worse. David clicked to another tab. These are the Facebook messages I found in your old laptop, the one you gave me to wipe before donating. I found them in your trash folder. They were from my mother, sent in the months before she died. Mom. Sweetie, please stop giving your father money for Jake. It's not helping either of them. Mom. I know Dad is pressuring you. Stand firm. Jake needs to face consequences, not bailouts. Mom. Your father is angry with me for talking to you about this. But I need you to know, when I'm gone, you don't owe them anything. You've already given more than enough. I hadn't remembered these messages, or maybe I'd deliberately forgotten them. Too painful to look at after she died. Your mom knew. David's voice was gentle. She knew exactly what they'd do after she was gone, and she was trying to protect you. The tears came then, hot and fast. Grief for my mother mixed with rage at my father and brother for betraying what she'd asked. She'd literally used her dying breath to try to free me from this dynamic, and I'd let guilt drag me back into it anyway. I'm done letting them manipulate me. I wipe my face with the back of my hand, but I don't know how to make them stop. We document everything. David pulled out his phone. I already changed the locks while you were feeding Lily. I've set up security cameras that upload to the cloud. Every text message, every call, every surprise visit gets recorded and saved. We build a case. A case for what? Restraining order if needed. Harassment charges if it continues. But mostly, he smiled, and there was something cold in it. We wait. People like Jake always self-destruct. We just need to make sure we're protected when it happens, and that we have evidence of everything they've done. I thought about the spreadsheet, the messages from my mom, the 3 days of harassment. David was right. This wasn't about the money anymore. This was about breaking free from a family system that had been broken long before I was born. Okay, I straightened my shoulders. Show me how to use those cameras. What I didn't tell David yet was that I'd already started my own documentation. A folder on my work laptop labeled Mom's Medical Records that actually contained every text message, every email, every social media post where Jake or Dad had manipulated or threatened me. I'd been collecting evidence since Mom's funeral without even fully knowing why. Now I knew. Some part of me had been preparing for this moment all along. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. You'll regret this. I took a screenshot, added it to my folder, and blocked the number. 37 messages so far today. 37 pieces of evidence. Let them keep coming. The harassment intensified over the next 2 weeks. My father showed up at my house 4 more times despite the changed locks, standing on the porch and shouting through the door about family loyalty. Jake created fake social media accounts to send me messages. Someone left a dead rat on my doorstep with a note, "This is what happens to rats who abandon family." That last one got the police involved again. They took the note as evidence, but told me what I already knew. Unless I could prove who left it, there wasn't much they could do. But the worst came at work. I'd returned from maternity leave early, working hybrid from home most days, but going into the office for critical meetings. On my second day back, I walked into the conference room to find Jake sitting in the lobby. My stomach dropped. "How did you get in here?" I told reception I was your brother delivering lunch. He held up a paper bag from my favorite sandwich shop. That familiar Jake smile on his face. The one that had charmed teachers and cops and girlfriends his entire life. "Can we talk? Just 5 minutes?" "No." I turned to walk back to security. "Rebecca, please." His voice cracked. "I'm desperate. Those people came to Dad's house last night. They smashed his car windows. They said next time it won't be the car." I stopped walking but didn't turn around. "Then Dad should call the police. You know they won't help. These people don't play by normal rules." He moved closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath at 10 in the morning. "I need $32,000. That's what it'll take to clear the debt and get them to leave us alone. That's $9,000 more than Dad told me you owed. Interest. Late fees." He said it like it was nothing, like money was just numbers that appeared when convenient. "I've been trying to scrape it together, but I lost my job because of you, because of your choices." I finally turned to face him. "You sent me a threatening text while I was in the hospital. What did you think would happen?" "I was desperate. You don't know what it's like to have these people breathing down your neck, calling at all hours." "You're right, I don't know what that's like. Because I don't gamble money I don't have." I pulled out my phone. "You have 30 seconds to leave before I call security. Just hear me out." He put his hand on my arm. Not hard, but firm. The touch of someone used to getting physical to make a point. "I have a plan. There's this investment opportunity, practically guaranteed returns. If you front me 50,000, I jerked my arm away. 50,000? You just said 32. 32 for the debt, 18 for the investment. He said it like it was reasonable. "I can double it in 3 months, pay you back everything including what I've borrowed before. Get out." My voice came out low and dangerous. "Get out of my workplace right now or I'm having you arrested for trespassing." His expression shifted then, the pleading brother mask dropping to reveal something uglier underneath. "You think you're so much better than me? Mom's perfect little girl who could do no wrong, but you're just a selfish bitch who'd rather see her own brother hurt than help him." My boss appeared in the doorway behind Jake. Lauren was 50, built like a rugby player, and took exactly zero nonsense. "Is there a problem here?" "This man needs to leave." I kept my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "He's not authorized to be in this building." Lauren stepped forward, all professional courtesy. "Sir, I'm going to need you to exit the premises immediately." Jake looked between us, calculating. Then he picked up the sandwich bag and threw it at me. It hit my chest, mustard and mayo splattering across my blouse. "Keep your money, bitch. I hope you choke on it." Security appeared within minutes. They escorted Jake out while he shouted about family betrayal and selfish sisters. Everyone on my floor had heard. Everyone had seen the mustard stain spreading across my white blouse like blood. Lauren walked me to her office. "Tell me everything. And don't leave anything out." So I did. The hospital demand, the threats, the break-ins, the harassment, Jake showing up at my workplace. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each detail. "We have zero tolerance for workplace harassment, even from family members." She pulled up something on her computer. "I'm putting a formal ban in place. If he shows up here again, he'll be arrested for trespassing. I'm also notifying our security company to flag him in their system." "Thank you." The relief made my knees weak. "Don't thank me yet. I need you to file a police report about today's incident. That threw food at you. That's assault. Technically." She handed me a business card. "This is my lawyer. She specializes in restraining orders. Call her. This situation is escalating." That night, David found me at the kitchen table surrounded by printouts. Every text message, every social media post, every police report, the spreadsheet tracking the money, photos of Dad standing on our porch shouting, the security camera footage. What are you doing? He set down 2 cups of tea, the gesture so normal it almost made me laugh. Building my case? I looked up at him. I'm getting a restraining order against both of them. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly why. Everyone? Everyone. I pulled up my laptop and opened a document I'd been working on for days. My father's church congregation, his retirement community board, Jake's new girlfriend he's been posting about on Facebook, his parole officer from that DUI 3 years ago that I just learned he violated by leaving the state. Everyone who thinks they know who these men are needs to know the truth. David sat down slowly. That's going to nuke whatever's left of your relationship with them. Good, I meant it. They've spent years controlling me through guilt and family obligation. They've threatened me, harassed me, shown up at my workplace, all because I won't fund Jake's gambling addiction. I'm done protecting their reputations while they destroy my peace. What do you need from me? Proof that Dad took out a home equity loan. I pulled up a property records website. It's public information, but I need the exact amount and date. If he borrowed money to cover Jake's debt, that's relevant to the restraining order. David worked his laptop magic while I continued organizing documents. Within an hour, we had it. Dad had borrowed $68,000 against his house 3 days after Lily was born. The timing was damning. He told me he had to do it because of me. I stared at the numbers. But he did it before even trying to get money from me. This was always the plan. Make me feel guilty for a decision he'd already made. My phone rang. Dad. I let it go to voicemail. Then Jake called. Then Dad again. Then a number I didn't recognize. I put my phone on silent and added each attempt to my documentation spreadsheet. The next morning, I met with Lauren's lawyer. Her name was Patricia Huang, and she'd been handling harassment cases for 20 years. She reviewed my documentation with the efficiency of someone who'd seen this pattern before. This is one of the most thorough compilations I've seen from a client. She looked up from the thick folder. You've been documenting everything? Since my mother's funeral, mostly. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but something told me to keep records. Smart instinct. She pulled out a legal pad. Here's what we're going to do. We're filing for 2 separate restraining orders with the court next week. The documentation you have makes this straightforward, but I want to prepare you. They're going to fight it. And when they do, they're going to make you look like the villain. They're already doing that. It's going to get worse. Patricia's expression was sympathetic but firm. They'll drag out every childhood grudge every time you said no to them. Every moment they can twist to make you look cold or selfish. They'll tell the court you're keeping a grandfather from his grandchild out of spite. They'll paint Jake as a struggling addict who needs family support, not legal action. Can you handle that? I thought about my mother's messages, about the $47,000, about the mustard-stained blouse in my hamper, about my father standing on my porch screaming while my newborn daughter slept inside. Yes, I met Patricia's eyes. I can handle it, because I have the truth, and I have evidence. Let them bring their manipulation to court. I'll bring facts. What I didn't say was that I had more than facts. I had a plan forming, something cold and calculated that would ensure they never had power over anyone again. But that was for later, after the legal pieces were in place. First, I needed to make them desperate enough to reveal who they really were. And desperate people make mistakes. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Patricia filed for a temporary protection order that was granted within 48 hours. Dad and Jake were served papers at the same time. They couldn't contact me, couldn't come within 500 feet of my home or workplace, couldn't contact me through third parties. Jake violated it within 6 hours. He created a new Instagram account, posed as someone interested in my company's services, and sent a direct message. Tell your lawyer to back off or everyone finds out what kind of person you really are. Screenshot. Police report. Documentation added to the folder. Dad was smarter. He didn't violate the order directly. Instead, he went to my mother's church, the one where she'd been active for 30 years, and told everyone I'd cut him off from his only grandchild. He showed them photos of Mom's grave, crying about how she'd be heartbroken to see her family torn apart by her daughter's selfishness. By the time I heard about it, half the congregation had sent me emails. Some were kind, urging reconciliation. Others were vicious, calling me unforgiving and cruel. Several told me I was spitting on my mother's memory. He's weaponizing her death. I showed David the emails, my hands shaking with rage. He's using Mom's reputation to make me look like the villain. Then maybe it's time to show them who the real villain is. David pulled up his laptop. Patricia said no contact. She didn't say anything about public information sharing. I knew what he was suggesting. The documentation I'd compiled wasn't just for court. It was a story, a comprehensive timeline of abuse and manipulation that spanned years. and stories could be shared. I created a private blog, password protected, and uploaded everything. The spreadsheet showing $47,000 in unrepaid loans. The text messages demanding money while I was in labor. The screenshots of Jake's threats. The security footage of Dad pounding on my door. My mother's messages begging me to stop enabling them. The police reports. All of it, organized chronologically with clinical precision. Then I sent the link and password to 5 people. My mother's best friend, her 2 sisters, the church pastor, and Dad's retirement community director. The email was simple. You've heard my father's version of events. Here is the documented truth. These are facts, not feelings, evidence, not accusations. I'm sharing this because my mother spent her final months trying to protect me from exactly what has happened since her death. She deserves to have her wishes honored, and that means the truth needs to be told. The response was nuclear. Mom's best friend called within an hour crying, I had no idea. Richard told everyone you'd refused to help Jake with medical bills. He said you were bitter about your mother leaving him the house. Mom left him the house because I told her to. The lie they'd built was so comprehensive, so detailed. I already owned my home. I didn't need hers. But Jake thought he deserved a share, even though he hadn't helped with her care at all. I remember. Her voice hardened. He visited her exactly twice in 6 months. You were there every day after work. Mom's sisters called a family meeting. Dad wasn't invited. They'd read every word, looked at every screenshot, and wanted answers. The meeting happened at my Aunt Linda's house with both aunts, Mom's best friend, and me. Your mother told me Richard had a blind spot about Jake. Aunt Linda poured coffee with trembling hands, but she never told me it was this bad. $47,000, Rebecca? That I can prove. It's probably more. I pulled out my laptop. I found the records after Mom died. She'd been tracking it too, keeping her own spreadsheet. She knew exactly how much they'd taken from me. Aunt Patricia, the younger sister, was less emotional and more practical. What do you need from us? The truth at the restraining order hearing. I looked at each of them. Dad's going to paint me as a cruel daughter who abandoned him. I need people who knew Mom to tell the court what she actually wanted, what she said before she died. They agreed immediately, all 3 of them. They'd testify to Mom's concerns about Jake's addiction and Dad's enabling. They'd provide their own documentation of money Dad had borrowed from them for family emergencies that turned out to be Jake's debts. The church pastor, Father Michael, called separately. I should have seen this sooner. Your father has been very generous with donations lately. Now I understand where that money came from, home equity loan. I pulled up the property records on my screen. $68,000 borrowed against the house Mom left him. He told the church it was retirement savings he wanted to share. That changes things. Father Michael's voice was heavy. The church has policies about financial manipulation. We've had situations before where members use the congregation's sympathy to enable destructive behavior. I'll need to address this with the church board. Within days, the narrative shifted. The church congregation received a letter from Father Michael about the situation, carefully worded but clear. Dad's retirement community was notified of the restraining order and the reasons for it. Mom's friends and family started pushing back against his victim story with facts. Jake responded by having a very public breakdown on Facebook. He posted a long, rambling message about addiction and family betrayal, how his own sister had turned their father's church against him, how he was suffering while I lived in my comfortable house with my comfortable life. The post got sympathy at first. Then someone commented, "Didn't you send your sister threats while she was in the hospital?" Another comment, "Bro, I saw the police report. You threw food at her workplace." A third, "Your own mom told her to stop giving you money before she died. This is public record now." Jake deleted the post within hours, but screenshots lived forever. I saved them all. The mistakes were piling up exactly as I'd planned. Every violation, every lie, every manipulation attempt was documented. They were building my case for me. 3 days before the restraining order hearing, Dad's lawyer called Patricia. They wanted to negotiate. What are they offering? I asked when Patricia called me. Your father will stop contacting you if you agree to drop the restraining order and not share any more private family business publicly. Patricia's tone made it clear what she thought of this offer. He also wants you to write a letter to his church clarifying that he's a good father who made some mistakes. No, I told them you'd say that. They came back with a second offer. Jake will enter rehab if you help with the costs and drop all charges. Still no. I'd expected this. They don't want to change. They want to avoid consequences. That's my assessment too. Patricia paused. They also made some threats. Said they'd bring up things from your past, paint you as an ungrateful daughter, Claim you're an unfit mother. Let them try. My voice was steady. I have 30 years of being the responsible one. They have 30 years of documented dysfunction. If they want to make this a character comparison, I'll win. What I didn't tell Patricia was that I had one more piece of evidence to reveal, something I'd been holding back, waiting for the right moment. Jake's girlfriend, the one he'd been posting about on Facebook, had reached out to me. Her name was Amy, and she was pregnant. Jake had told her he was divorced and working in tech sales. He'd been living off her income while building his startup. She'd seen my documentation, recognized the patterns, and wanted to know the truth. I met her at a coffee shop, bringing printed copies of everything. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Jake has never been married. He doesn't work in tech. And there's no startup. She'd stared at the papers, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. He told me his ex-wife took everything in the divorce. That's why he couldn't help with money. He's never had anything to take. I pulled up the property records showing he'd been evicted from 3 apartments in 5 years. Amy, I'm showing you this because you're going to have a child with him. You need to know who he really is. I'm 8 weeks along. Her voice was barely a whisper. He asked me to put his name on my condo title last week. Said it would be better for the baby to have both parents on the deed. Don't. I touched her hand gently. Whatever you do, don't put him on anything. Not the condo, not bank accounts, nothing. He'll bleed you dry and disappear the moment someone he owes money to shows up. She left with every document I had, plus Patricia's business card. I didn't know if she'd use them, but I'd tried to help someone else escape the trap I'd spent 34 years in. 2 days before the hearing, Amy filed a police report. Jake had destroyed her laptop when she confronted him about the lies, then emptied her checking account using a debit card he'd convinced her to share for emergencies. The charges? Theft, destruction of property, and fraud. Jake was arrested at Dad's house, where he'd apparently been living since losing his apartment. The arrest report noted that police found evidence of ongoing gambling activity, betting slips, logged-in gambling websites, and emails from his bookie demanding payment. My father called Patricia's office from the police station, screaming about how I'd orchestrated Jake's arrest, how I'd turned his girlfriend against him, how I was systematically destroying his family. Patricia recorded the call, as she did with all client-related communications. More evidence for the folder. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Lily's nursery, watching her sleep, thinking about the mothers and daughters in my family. My grandmother had enabled my grandfather's drinking. My mother had enabled my father's enabling of Jake. And I'd almost continued the cycle. Almost taught my daughter that love meant sacrificing yourself to someone else's destruction. But I'd broken it. And tomorrow, I was going to make sure it stayed broken. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Less dramatic than TV made it seem. But the weight of what was about to happen felt massive anyway. Dad sat with his lawyer, dressed in his best suit, looking like the respectable retired teacher everyone thought he was. Jake wasn't there, still in jail on Amy's charges, with bail set high enough that Dad apparently couldn't cover it. Good. My side of the room held David, Patricia, my 2 aunts, Mom's best friend, and Father Michael, who'd come despite the awkwardness it would cause with Dad's church attendance. Their presence was a wall of support, but also of testimony. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Martinez, known for cutting through nonsense efficiently. She read through the petitions with a neutral expression, then looked up at Dad's lawyer. Mr. Morrison, your client is opposing these restraining orders. What's your argument? Morrison stood, smooth and practiced. Your Honor, this is a family disagreement that's been blown out of proportion. My client is a grieving widower who's trying to maintain a relationship with his daughter and granddaughter. The petitioner has used temporary anger over a loan request to cut off all family contact, deny a grandfather his rights, and publicly humiliate. Let me stop you there. Judge Martinez held up a hand. This petition is supported by 14 documented violations of a temporary restraining order, 5 police reports, evidence of threats, and workplace harassment. That's not anger over a loan request. Ms. Huang? Patricia stood, and I saw Dad's lawyer's confident expression flicker. Your Honor, we're requesting permanent restraining orders against both Richard Morgan and his son Jake Morgan. The evidence speaks to a pattern of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and escalating harassment that culminated in threats of violence. I've reviewed your documentation. The judge looked at Dad. Mr. Morgan, I'm particularly troubled by the messages sent to your daughter while she was in the hospital after giving birth. Can you explain your thinking there? Dad stood, and I saw him calculating how to play this. Contrite? Defensive? He chose wounded father. Your Honor, my son was in genuine danger from loan sharks. I was desperate to help him. My daughter had just received a promotion with a significant bonus. I thought she would want to help her brother. Did you ask about your granddaughter? The judge's voice was sharp. Congratulate her on the birth? Express any concern for her medical well-being? Dad's pause was too long. Of course I did, Your Honor. Family is everything to me. The text messages I have here suggest otherwise. She pulled out a document. Your first message to her after the birth was, and I quote, "Don't be dramatic. Family helps family. Your brother is in real trouble this time." No mention of the baby at all. I was under stress. Mr. Morgan, I've seen the spreadsheet tracking loans you and your son requested from the petitioner. $47,000 over 3 years. How much of that has been repaid? Another too long pause. We're family, Your Honor. It wasn't loans so much as helping each other. How much has been repaid? Judge Martinez repeated, her tone making it clear she wanted a number. The family financial situation has been difficult. $0. Patricia stood. The answer is $0 has been repaid, Your Honor. And I'd like to submit additional evidence that came to light this week. She handed documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. They were bank records, obtained through Amy's cooperation with police, showing Jake had deposited $13,000 into Dad's account 2 months ago. Money that Amy's records proved came from her savings. Mr. Morgan, the judge's voice was ice now. Did you accept money from your son knowing it was stolen from his girlfriend? Dad's face went gray. I didn't know it was stolen. Jake told me it was his savings. Your son, who you just told the court is in such dire financial straits that he needed his sister to wire him $5,000 immediately? That son had $13,000 in savings? The judge's skepticism was withering. The same son who has now been arrested for theft and fraud? Morrison tried to recover. Your Honor, my client has been manipulated by his son's addiction. He's a victim here too. Ms. Huang, I believe you have witnesses? The judge cut him off. Patricia called Mom's best friend first. Under oath, she testified about conversations with Mom in her final weeks, where Mom had explicitly stated her fears about Richard and Jake pressuring me for money after she was gone. She described Mom's distress over the situation and her attempts to protect me. Then Aunt Linda, who testified about her own loans to Richard over the years, money she'd thought was for household expenses that turned out to be for Jake's gambling debts. She'd found out when Jake mentioned it at Mom's funeral. Then Father Michael, who described Dad's recent church donations and how he'd used his reputation as a grieving widower to manipulate the congregation's sympathy. Mr. Morgan told us his daughter had abandoned the family and refused to help with his son's medical treatment. We now know that was false. There was no medical treatment, only gambling debts. Dad's lawyer tried to cross-examine, to poke holes in their testimony, but the facts were too solid. These weren't emotional accusations. They were documented timelines with evidence. Finally, Patricia called me to the stand. Under oath, I walked through the entire history. The loans starting small and growing larger, the promises of repayment that never materialized, the manipulation tactics, the guilt trips about Mom, the escalation after I had Lily. Ms. Morgan, why did you finally decide to file for a restraining order? Patricia asked. Because they threatened my daughter's safety. My voice was steady, clear. My brother sent threats while I was in a hospital bed holding my newborn. My father broke into my home and shouted abuse while she slept. I realized they would never stop. And every time I gave in, I was teaching them that threatening me works. I couldn't let my daughter grow up learning that love looks like exploitation and the money you've given them over the years. Do you expect repayment? No. I looked directly at Dad. I expect them to leave me and my family alone. That's all I've ever wanted. To be free of the constant demands, the guilt trips, the threats. To build a life with my husband and daughter where love isn't transactional. Morrison's cross-examination was brutal, as Patricia had warned. He brought up every time I'd said no to them, painted me as cold and calculating. He suggested I was using the restraining order to avoid family obligations. He even implied I was an unfit mother for abandoning my father. But Patricia had prepared me. I answered every question with facts and documentation. When he suggested I was exaggerating the threats, I recited them word for word. When he claimed I was keeping a grandfather from his grandchild out of spite, I pointed out that Dad had never asked to meet Lily, only for money. The judge finally held up her hand. That's enough, Mr. Morrison. I've heard what I need to hear. She looked at Dad. Mr. Morgan, I'm granting both restraining orders. You and your son are prohibited from contacting the petitioner in any form for a period of 5 years, at which time you may petition for review. You are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of her home or workplace. You are prohibited from attempting contact through third parties. Violation will result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Your Honor, please. Dad's voice cracked. She's my only daughter, my only grandchild. You can't. I can, and I have. Judge Martinez's expression was granite. You had multiple opportunities to behave like a father. Instead, you treated your daughter like an ATM machine and enabled your son's destructive behavior. You showed up at her workplace, violated a temporary restraining order, accepted stolen money, and emotionally manipulated her during one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. These orders are effective immediately. She banged her gavel and it was done. Dad's face contorted with rage as we stood to leave. This isn't over, Rebecca. You'll regret this. When you need help someday, when your perfect little life falls apart, don't come crying to me, Mr. Morgan. Judge Martinez's voice cracked like a whip. That statement constitutes a threat made in my courtroom. Bailiff, take him into custody for contempt. I watched as the bailiff approached my father, the shock on his face almost comical. Morrison was frantically trying to smooth things over, but the judge was unmoved. Dad was handcuffed and led away, still sputtering about family and betrayal. Outside the courthouse, Patricia was grim but satisfied. That could not have gone better. The contempt charge will be on his record now, which strengthens the restraining order. And his threat in front of a judge means if he violates the order, prosecutors will take it very seriously. David wrapped his arm around me. You did it. You're free, but I wasn't quite done yet. That evening, I sat down and wrote one final piece for my private blog. A complete timeline of everything that had happened since Mom's death, including the court transcript from today's hearing, Judge Martinez's ruling, and Dad's contempt charge. I added screenshots of every violation, every threat, every manipulation attempt. Then I made the blog public. Within hours, it had been shared across Mom's entire social network. Her church group, her book club, the cancer survivor support group she'd founded, her former co-workers from the hospital. Everyone who had known and loved my mother saw exactly what her husband and son had become after her death. The response was swift and brutal for Dad. The retirement community board called an emergency meeting. Dad's position as treasurer was terminated immediately when they discovered he'd been borrowing money from other residents using sympathy about his ungrateful daughter to manipulate them. 3 people had given him loans totaling $11,000. Father Michael sent a formal letter to the congregation explaining that Richard Morgan was no longer in good standing with the church due to financial manipulation and dishonesty. His donations were being returned, and he was asked not to attend services until he'd undergone counseling. Mom's friends organized a support fund for me, which I immediately directed to Amy, who was now facing single motherhood with her savings depleted and her trust shattered. Jake's situation was even worse. The theft and fraud charges from Amy were just the beginning. Once police started investigating, they found he'd scammed 3 other women using similar tactics over the past 2 years. The district attorney charged him with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and identity theft after discovering he'd used one woman's information to open credit cards. His bail was revoked. He'd be in jail awaiting trial for months. Dad tried one last desperate move. He called a local news station claiming I was an elder abuse perpetrator who'd stolen his money and turned his church against him. The reporter who called me to fact-check the story got Patricia instead. She provided the court transcripts, the restraining order documentation, and the evidence of Dad's manipulation. The story that aired was very different from what Dad had hoped for. Local man arrested for contempt after years of financially exploiting daughter. The interview included footage of Patricia explaining financial elder abuse versus adult children protecting themselves from exploitative parents. Dad became the poster child for the latter. His reputation in the community was destroyed. The retirement community asked him to move out. His church had banned him. Mom's friends wanted nothing to do with him. Even his own sisters had cut contact after learning the full truth. 3 weeks after the hearing, I received a letter from Dad. Not addressed to me directly, which would violate the restraining order, but sent to Patricia's office for her to decide whether to forward it. She called me first. Do you want to read this? You don't have to. Send it. I needed to know what he'd say now that he'd lost everything. The letter was 5 pages of handwritten rambling. It started with accusations, blaming me for destroying his life and Jake's future. It claimed I'd manipulated the court and lied to everyone. It insisted he'd only been trying to help his son, and I'd criminalized normal family behavior. But by the 3rd page, the tone shifted. The accusations gave way to self-pity. He was losing his house because the home equity loan payments were too high. He had no friends left. His church family had abandoned him. He was alone, and it was all my fault. The 4th page was bargaining. If I would just write a letter explaining it was all a misunderstanding, maybe his reputation could be salvaged, If I would drop the restraining order, he would promise to never ask me for money again. If I would just give him one more chance, he would prove he could be the father I deserved. The final page was the closest he came to accountability, but it was hollow. Maybe I made some mistakes. Maybe I should have handled things differently. But families are supposed to forgive each other, Rebecca. Your mother would have forgiven me. I read it twice, then filed it with all the other documentation. It was evidence of exactly who he was, someone who would only apologize when consequences became unbearable. And even then, his apology was really just another manipulation attempt. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. 1 year after the restraining orders were granted, I stood in my backyard watching Lily take her first steps. David caught her as she stumbled, both of them laughing, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The past year had been transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined. Without the constant drain of Dad and Jake's demands, my savings account had grown substantially. David and I had paid off my student loans, renovated the nursery, and started a college fund for Lily. Small things that felt revolutionary after years of watching money disappear into their bottomless pit of need. My career had flourished too. The promotion I'd received before Lily's birth was followed by another 6 months later. I was now director of marketing, leading a team of 12, with the respect and autonomy I'd worked years to earn. Not having to take urgent calls from Dad or deal with Jake showing up at my workplace had made me more focused, more present, more effective. But the real transformation was internal. The guilt that had haunted me for decades had finally loosened its grip. I'd spent so much of my life believing I owed them something, that good daughters sacrificed themselves for family, that saying no made me selfish. Therapy had helped me understand that I'd been conditioned to accept emotional abuse as love. My therapist had explained it clearly. People who truly love you don't threaten you when you set boundaries. They don't exploit your vulnerable moments. They don't measure your worth by what you can provide them financially. Jake was serving 2 years in state prison after pleading guilty to multiple fraud charges. Amy had given birth to a daughter 3 months ago and successfully sued for full custody and child support, though Jake obviously couldn't pay from prison. She'd reached out to thank me for warning her, for giving her the documentation that helped her protect herself and her daughter. "You saved us," she'd said over coffee while our daughters slept in their strollers. I was about to put him on my condo title. He would have destroyed everything. Dad had lost his house to foreclosure. The home equity loan, combined with his inability to manipulate anyone else into giving him money, had made the payments impossible. He'd moved into a small apartment in a less expensive part of town, alone and bitter. According to Aunt Linda, who still occasionally checked on him out of obligation to Mom's memory, he spent his days on Facebook posting vague complaints about ungrateful children and how family meant nothing anymore. People who didn't know the full story sometimes sympathized. People who did know ignored him. He'd tried to violate the restraining order twice, once by sending a birthday card to Lily through a former church member who didn't know better, once by showing up at David's workplace to talk man to man about his unreasonable wife. Both violations resulted in his arrest and additional legal consequences. Judge Martinez had been clear. "Mr. Morgan, this court has given you every opportunity to accept boundaries. Your continued violations demonstrate that you are incapable of respecting your daughter's legal right to safety. Next violation will result in jail time." He hadn't tried since. The extended family dynamics had settled into a new normal. Mom's sisters remained close to me, delighted to be aunts to Lily. Mom's friends treated me like the daughter they wanted to protect, bringing casseroles and babysitting offers and genuine love that didn't come with strings attached. Father Michael had reached out 6 months ago to tell me that several people in Mom's church had come forward with their own stories of Dad's manipulation. He'd borrowed money from at least 8 families, always with sob stories about unexpected expenses or helping Jake with medical bills. None of it had been repaid. "Your mother tried to stop him," Father Michael had said quietly. "She came to me a year before she died and asked me to watch for this pattern. She knew what he was capable of, and she was trying to protect the congregation. I wish I'd listened more carefully." The strangest part of recovery was discovering who I was without the weight of their dysfunction. I'd spent 34 years defining myself in relation to their needs and demands. Without that, I had space to figure out what I actually wanted. I started painting again, something I'd loved in college but abandoned as impractical. My home office now had an easel in the corner, and I'd sold 3 pieces at a local art fair, Not for much money, but the act of creating something beautiful, just because I wanted to, felt revolutionary. David and I traveled more, taking Lily on small trips to the coast and the mountains, building memories as our own unit, our own family, defined by choice and love rather than obligation and guilt. I'd started volunteering with a local nonprofit that helped women escape financial abuse. My documentation methods, the spreadsheets and evidence collection that had saved me, I now taught to others, helping them build cases against partners or family members who exploited them, showing them that saying no didn't make them bad people. "You gave me my blueprint," one woman told me after securing her own restraining order against an abusive brother. "Seeing your documentation, knowing someone else had been through it and survived, it gave me courage." That became my purpose, turning my trauma into a tool that helped others escape theirs. Last week, I received a message through Patricia's office. Dad wanted to ask permission to attend a family funeral, Mom's aunt who'd passed away at 93. The service would be at the same church he'd been banned from, and he wanted to know if I'd agree to temporarily suspend the restraining order for the day. Patricia had presented the request neutrally, but I knew what she'd recommend. "You don't owe him this. You don't owe him anything." I'd thought about it for 2 days. Then I'd written my response. "No, my mother's family has made it clear they don't want Richard Morgan at their gatherings after learning what he did to me and to Mom before her death. This request is another manipulation attempt, using a funeral to force contact. The restraining order stands." Patricia had delivered the message. Dad's response, forwarded to her, had been predictable. More accusations of cruelty, more claims that I'd brainwashed the family, more self-pity about his loneliness. I'd filed it with the rest and moved on, because that was the thing I'd finally learned. I didn't have to respond to every provocation. I didn't have to justify my boundaries. I didn't have to convince them I was right. The court had decided. The family had decided. I had decided. And they would have to live with the consequences of their own choices, just like I was living with mine. Standing in my backyard watching my daughter play, I thought about my mother, about the messages she'd sent trying to protect me, about her final wish that I be free from this cycle. "I did it, Mom," I whispered. "I broke free, and I'm teaching Lily something different. I'm teaching her that love doesn't hurt. That family is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. That saying no when someone hurts you isn't cruelty, it's survival." Lily squealed as David tickled her, her laughter pure and joyful. She would never know her grandfather or uncle. She would never experience the particular kind of pain that comes from family exploitation. And that wasn't a tragedy. That was a gift. The greatest gift I could give her. A life free from the poison of conditional love and financial manipulation. A life where trust wasn't a weapon and vulnerability wasn't a weakness. David caught my eye over Lily's head and smiled. He knew what I was thinking, had walked this entire journey beside me. "You okay?" he mouthed. I nodded, meaning it completely. I was more than okay. I was free. And Dad and Jake? They were exactly where they'd put themselves. Alone, broke, disgraced, and facing consequences they'd spent decades avoiding. Their reputations destroyed by their own actions, documented and proven in court. They'd gambled that I would always cave, always prioritize peace over justice, always choose being a good daughter over being a protected person. They'd lost that bet, and unlike Jake's gambling debts, there was no one left to bail them out. Sometimes late at night, when Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, I'd look at the documentation I'd compiled. Hundreds of pages of evidence that told the story of abuse, manipulation, and ultimately, justice. Other women had asked for copies to use as templates for their own cases. Lawyers had requested permission to use it as an example in training materials. It had become something bigger than just my personal vindication. It had become proof that you could escape. That documentation and boundaries and legal protection could work. That family relationships built on exploitation could be ended, and life could be better on the other side. I kept every piece of evidence, every court document, every police report, not because I needed to prove anything anymore, but because they represented something important. The moment I chose myself. The moment I decided my daughter deserved better than I'd had. The moment I stopped being their victim and became their consequence. And if Dad or Jake ever wondered why I never relented, why I never softened, why I never gave them another chance, they needed only to look at their own documented behavior. Every threat, every manipulation, Every time they'd chosen to hurt me rather than respect me. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. And I was teaching Lily to make hers too. A life where family meant safety, not exploitation. Where boundaries were respected, not violated. Where love was demonstrated through kindness, not demanded through guilt. That was my revenge. Not just escaping them, but building something beautiful in the space they used to occupy. Not just surviving their abuse, but thriving without them. Living well wasn't just the best revenge. It was the only one that mattered.